Welcome on the stage. Let's applause.
What's your name?
Hi.
Yes.
Alt.
All right. So especially for you, I will actually try to be loud. Let's see how much voice I have for that. One really experienced presenter once told me that never speak after lunch and after the cake. So now I'm actually making this mistake. But on the other hand, if any of you will fall asleep, then I have justification for that. I will always blame the cake. Also, don't worry, I am guaranteed not to speak very long, because after this thing here, I will go to the airplane and I will need to fly away. So also some plane is dictating that I won't take too much and too long of your attention. Today I will be talking about a true story of a company called Wise, and about our journey through several years growing the product and growing the technical organization that builds the product from tens of engineers to hundreds of engineers. And I hope that it will be exciting, and I also hope that it will be useful for many of you here. Maybe you are going through similar stages with your company. Maybe you will be going through similar stages in future. So let's see, hopefully you will be able to take away something interesting or useful from it. Just in case, if you have not heard about Wise, then we are a company that has a mission of moving borders in the world of finance. So in the world of travel, people, when they move between countries, they have different factors that cause friction, like visas, COVID passes. So it all makes it complicated to move between borders. In the world of finance, there are also some restrictions, and we want to remove those restrictions, because international finance is slow, it is expensive, very often it's not convenient. Domestic finance, the one that you get from your home bank, usually is instant. It's usually cheap on a domestic level, and it's usually much more convenient to deal with your finances in one country rather than in multiple countries. So our mission is taking this domestic experience and giving it to people who live international lifestyle. So you can imagine that Wise is one global bank that is present in any country where you move, and you will feel like a local person there. So our focus is to reduce the price, reduce the speed, and increase the convenience of international finance. And obviously the target customer and audience is very specific. It's a person that has an international lifestyle, or maybe business in multiple countries. And without going too deep into different stats about the company, I will just present one stat from a couple of years ago. So in the overall global consumer market in international remittance and moving money between borders, which is about 2.6 trillion, $1 in every $40 was moved by Wise back then already, which means that the market share is about 2.5%. And in any industry in the world, if a company is measuring its market share already in single-digit percentages, then the influence is quite large. And why I think it's awesome is because it was created by two Estonians. The biggest development center is and the biggest office that we have, where we have a lot of engineers, is in Tallinn, and a lot of people from different Baltic nations work with us and build the product. And a few words about myself. So right now my main focus is on the platform spin-off or pivot of the business. So recently we also started selling our technology to different big banks and different institutions. For example, last summer Google in US started using our APIs to implement Google Pay for US consumers, which use it on a cross-country level. And also congratulations to the team of DevClub. So Latvian DevClub is definitely my favorite DevClub in the world. So 100 events, Edgar's well done. And and when Edgar told me that this is the anniversary event, then I thought about the topic and kind of concluded that, okay, maybe let's talk about different anniversaries, because companies at some point, reach anniversaries of sales, profit, amount of customers, or for example also the size of the company, which normally, if business is being built sustainably, is growing roughly at the same pace as the growth of the product. So usually, if companies start hiring people quicker than the actual growth of their product, then in hard times, and likely we are going to see that in the next maybe like year or months, they might need to then do something to reduce the headcount cost. So so now I'm going anyway a little bit off the script, but I chose this topic, because I feel that most likely in Baltics and in Latvia and Lithuania, Estonia, there will be more and more startups that will be growing to similar sizes. So let's talk about the anniversary, about when we reached about 500 engineers and what we learned from that. And at some point last year, I was checking out some engineering stats, and I discovered that in Wise we actually have more microservices than we have engineers. So please raise your hand who is working with microservices today. So it's about 52% of people that are here. So, which is good, and I believe that most likely for other 48% of the audience, the concept is familiar, but just in case, usually companies don't start working on microservice architecture from day one, because it's not a smart way to start building something before you have validated the market fit. So usually they just start with one single application. Then at some point, it is inconvenient because you have different problems with releasing. You have single source of failure. If you need to deploy, you need to deploy everything that you have. If you need to roll back, you need to roll back everything that you have, and a lot of other issues why many companies choose to start splitting the architecture and just segregate different domains in standalone little applications that then speak between each other, for example, through the HTTP or gRPC or anything like that. So some of them have data sources, some of them don't, and in addition to synchronous conversation, usually there is also some message broker added so that they can also exchange messages asynchronously. And then it just keeps growing as you split more services. At some point you decide that you will be adding new functionality already in a new service, because the boundaries between different domain contexts are already well understood by teams, so it just keeps growing. And the only reason why I added this block of slides here is because I just wanted us to get on the same page how we approach the ownership of those services. So let's imagine that we have a small startup with 5 teams. Then it's a good practice to define the boundaries between teams by boundaries between services, so that you always have one single owning team per one service. They have right to review changes there, to merge changes by any teams that want to contribute there, and it is especially convenient if you have also a weak code ownership in the company, which means that any other team can come and contribute to your service if they need to build there something, but only you, the owning team, have a right to actually review the change and merge it into your service. And then, if we then imagine the scale of Y system, then we would need to multiply this picture by 32, because when I counted about months ago, we had 592 microservices or deployable client applications. For example, we have 4 mobile apps, and we also have a bunch of front-end, micro front-ends, and it's built by 579 engineers, and these engineers work in 18 98 teams, and these 98 teams are releasing different changes to customers 4,500 times every month. So simple math then kind of shows that we have less than 6 engineers per team, which is a healthy size. One smart man in Estonian DevClub once said that a good size for the team is when the whole team can eat 1 pizza. So if you already need 2 pizzas to feed the team, then it's too big. So I think we fit into that. We have roughly 6 microservices per team, so the splice that they own of this big cake of WISE technology is actually relatively small. If you think about almost 600 microservices, then owning about 6 services is you have full freedom there, but your freedom is really limited because your scope is only 6 services out of hundreds. And each team, on average, is releasing some things to customers more than once every day. And if we count in work days, then it's probably more than 2 times. So, and of course, to achieve this speed of delivery to customers, you need to have direct access to releasing things to production, or you need to have continuous releasing, which I think for financial services I wouldn't choose as an option, because I always want engineers to be there, do the rollout with their own hands, monitor how everything is looking, maybe use canary releasing, and then if something goes wrong, then we always have an engineer here who can roll it back. So in our model, teams own specific services, and any engineer in that team is able to release their service straight to production to deliver those features to customers. And I guess our journey has been very, very standard in today's world. Started with one single monolithic application. It took us 3 years to sort of validate the market fit and kind of make sure that we as a company are moving in the right direction. No big pivots there, but then after 3 years, when I joined, we still had one monolith, but then we split it into 2, and our first split was segregating the customer-facing part of the system from the back-office system, because we realized that the cadence and the reasons for releasing changes here and there were different. So that seemed like the very first thing that is good splitting. The next step was moving away from this Grails framework and implementing separated front end. And then from there on, from that year, as we had 2 first microservices and a separated front end, then it exploded. Then just in 2 years, we got to 80 microservices. Then we went to 400 microservices, and then we started adding hundreds of them per year. And I guess this journey, many companies, and I'm quite sure that few people here in this room also have experienced the same. And also, it is commonly accepted the belief that starting new features and new companies, it's always best if you start with monolith, because in the beginning the performance of the team in monoliths is higher, and at some point, as the complexity of the business logic and the product starts growing, the amount of code starts growing, at some point the performance starts going down. So teams just need to catch this right moment to start paying back the technical debt and starting to decompose their monolithic parts of the system. But then this 590 people, this is actually only 20% of the company, so we have more than 3,000 people now working in WISE. But again, I think that the principles how companies like WISE work, they are actually, again, very common, for example, in Silicon Valley and in large and successful and quickly growing startups. And in case you haven't read any of these books, The Lean Startup and Measure What Matters, this is definitely book recommendation to you, because the blue one, the Lean Startup, back in 2013 when I read it, it completely kind of changed my perspective about working in the IT industry. So this book has become like the standard to approaching MVP design and growing the company in a data-driven way. So a lot of successful companies have adopted like most of the practices that are written there. And second one is Measure That Matters. It focuses on the OKR framework, the framework that Google made really popular. But this book talks about how this framework actually was created in Intel and then found its way to Google and to many other successful companies. So if you haven't read those books and you work on building some product and you want to achieve 10x or like 20x, 30x growth, then definitely trust me, read these books, and they will also give a good perspective of how many successful companies operate. But the common kind of key or aspect there is that a lot of development in those in such companies, in such enterprises, is actually very much data driven. So it's like always this cycle that they try to predict every outcome of every move, of every change that they make. So they put together some data-driven expectations, like even like smallest change. So they measure everything. Then, as they are able to measure it, they are able to conclude what is the result of every change. Then, if the change happened as expected, then it's good. If it didn't happen as expected, it is good as well, because you are able to measure that things are not working the way how you predicted, which means that you have learnings, and then you keep moving to next and next cycles. So data is there always before making any move and while like learning what you learned from the move. And for me, this means that data scientists and data analysts are kind of types of roles that in modern world are gaining the influence and the power over people's life. Today, guys that are working on those models decide how long you will be scrolling your TikTok tomorrow. They basically influence and decide which candidate will be successful at presidential campaigns and so on. So really like this data science and data-driven kind of development of products and shaping the behavior of the customer to get larger customer adoption, this has become like a real norm. And of course, it also means that companies these days are like really obsessed with observability, monitoring on all levels, starting from technical level, kind of understanding how your systems perform, and when you have some anomalies that are alerting you and waking you up at night and like making sure that you are there for the customer to deal with them, ending up with every little like aspect about the customer behavior and understanding what they do, why they don't do the way how you want to do, and then when you apply changes, then you get learnings and see whether it worked or not. And it's like endless testing, measuring, and those like little improvements all the time increase the overall performance of your product. So one thing which maybe like we went off script and we decided to like invent some of new things which are not maybe so common in the market is making our product roadmap public and posting mission updates. So what it is, every one of you can go to wise.com/mission roadmap, and there, so imagine if you made your Trello or Jira public to every customer, to the whole world, but only on the epic level. So like really like high level, like all new features or new expansions to new markets, all new like sub products and new products in new regions. So you talk about it all publicly, and you talk about it all like maybe half a year to a year upfront. So at some point, yeah, we decided to completely open our plans, and now anyone can go and see what features will Wise consist of maybe like a year from now. And of course, like for us, it also means that if we say something like that publicly, it means that we need to be accountable for it. We actually need to deliver those things. So it also increases the discipline, because it creates this culture of saying something to customers and then having to release it to them on time. Other thing is that, yeah, we started together with that, posting those quarterly updates where we actually summarize everything that we have delivered during the previous quarter, and making sure that it is also matching everything that we have on the public roadmap. But the reason I was saying that is because it also like means that the company and the product and like all volumes, they just keep growing, and when an organization is growing, there are actually a lot of underwater stones, and there are many dangers associated with that. So if I like hear about some 3,000 people company, the first thing that I imagine is, wow, that must be like really corporate. So probably there are a lot of managers, and in order to get anything done, you probably need to jump from like through different corporate loops, and like you don't have this like kind of freedom to innovate, and probably like someone is telling you what to do. And you know, this is definitely not the type of environment where you can like create a lot of innovation and move fast. So I think for startups and scale-ups, one important thing is to maintain the speed and not become corporate, and leave this freedom and creativity to the hands of product engineers. And many companies in the world, actually all of them that grow, they actually go through the same patterns of problems. So it's like obviously running a 10 people company is very different from running a 50 people company. Running a 50 people company is very different from running a 150 people company, and running a 500 people company is different from running a 3,000 people company. But luckily there are a lot of large companies in the world, so there is a lot of literature and materials written and like theories, and what has been observed that those problems usually as companies scale are predictable, and there are you know, special models and rules what to do when you reach some specific stage. But as we approach the product engineering in a very data-driven way, then at some point, like we had this idea that probably in order to not slow down, in order to keep this creativity in the teams, we probably need to approach growing the engineering team also in the same way. And the good thing there was that software engineering is actually one of the simplest types of jobs and roles when it comes to collecting the stats of the performance of teams, because everything that engineers do is actually happening on the computer. So they write the code, they commit it, they create a pull request, others review it, others like leave some comments, maybe they make some changes, then they merge it, so, and then they release it, and all those actions like are identifiable. You know who did it, in which team they are, so all that can be collected. So we built this engine that started collecting the engineer behavior data, and we started filtering it based on services that they contribute to and teams that they work in. And the very first draft of it was done by this guy. This is Bohdan, and he was first engineer at Wise. He's still with us. And as at the same time we were moving, we were at that stage where we were moving from, let's say, 2 microservices to 80 microservices. Then first thing that we started looking at is how quickly are we decomposing the monolith. And like we created this dashboard that was like showing us every day how much more code is in microservices now as opposed to the monolithic main application that we have. But then, in addition to like collecting like different sort of data like that, the data itself probably like will actually not tell you much if you don't have something extra. And then we hired a qualitative research and development professional. That was Mallory, and she is like really good at psychology. And she started interviewing hundreds of engineers in WISE and putting together her kind of vision and heat map about where are teams happy, what are their problems, what they like, what they don't like. And then we had basically two sources of data about the well-being, the performance, and kind of happiness of the teams. One was like a cold data, which came from machine, like from the bird's view. We were just like able to see like different trends and differences between teams. Another one was collected by humans, where we had some sort of psychology-based assessment of where engineers seem to be happy and where engineers are facing some difficulties and problems. And that was the moment where things actually became interesting, because then we started seeing patterns and connecting those machine collected stats with human collected stats. And one of the first kind of discovery, which probably is quite intuitive, but it was still really interesting to prove it with data, was that lead time is crucial for engineer happiness. And lead time is the time from some engineer starting to work on something to releasing it out to production to customers. So we saw the relationship between the duration of this time and how happy engineers were saying that they are. And it was like interesting to see on a data set of hundreds of engineers, because that was quite eye-opening. And then of course, like logically, it seems that lead time is great, but because you can ship things faster to customers, you can innovate faster. But now we also have this data point that, well, people are actually like really more happy when the lead time is great. So so in terms of the lead time, it is also kind of crucial in terms of the like general performance of the engineering team, because in order to increase the lead time, you need to increase the deployment frequency. To get there, you need to increase and improve your practices and automation. When you increase your like software engineering practices, automation and observability, you normally gain less problems and like less reasons to roll back your services if something goes wrong. And even if it goes wrong, then you have shorter mean time to restore, which leads to smaller change fail percentage. So it's like a really beautiful chain reaction where kind of applying those like practices and chasing this single goal of faster lead time gets you to the point where your teams are just basically like writing better code that has less problems in production. And like one thing that I didn't point out is that we don't have manual QA at all, so we only have test automation, kind of which goes like very well hand in hand with this approach, because without that, of course, straight releasing by engineers to production wouldn't be possible, because we would depend on this manual and non-scalable step of manual QA. And let me also like dive into some stats which were interesting to me. Like obviously, like when you move away from a monolithic application, at some point, when you already have like hundreds of microservices, probably a lot of time has passed. Some of them are becoming new monoliths. So you will need to also be able to detect when some of the services that you were decomposing become a new single point of failure, a new problem that you need to deal with. So having this like visibility over which ones of those hundreds of microservices are growing fastest of all, and then go and check why it is the case. Maybe it's time to split it. Many times it was proven to be useful. Then we started also just like tracking how many lines of code on the average each team has. So it also just like gives you this quantitative overview about like how big code base each of those teams is dealing with, and if you see that some of the teams like is really maintaining a huge chunk of code, then you can dig deeper into that and get a lot of insights from there as well, and also just a mere number of services. So if you see that on average, like team has 6 services and one of teams has 20 services, then maybe team lead needs to just like dig into that and figure out if there is like anything that might cause a problem or not, and if it's affecting the performance of the team or not. And like always, these dashboards and these metrics, we never tracked anything on a personal level. We always try to just do it on the team level, because we just saw it as a tool where teams, team members and team leads can just explore the data about themselves that you naturally don't sense as a human working in a team. And of course for team leads, because then they would be able to spot differences or like some bad differences versus other teams, and then they would know what to look into and where to find those like reasons why something might be not working very well. Another very intuitive thing, but again it was really interesting to prove it with data, was contribution to services on a team level and a cross-team level. So as all services are owned by certain teams and all teams can contribute to any service if they need to, then it was to start with just fun to prove that cross-team collaboration is slower than developing in your own service. I guess like it's obvious, because usually if the service is owned by other team, then you don't know the domain so well. You need to get a review from another team. So all these steps are of course slowing you down and dragging you away from this goal of releasing multiple times a day. And then yeah, we were looking at top growing services and most popular services. And most popular services are the ones where we see that there are a lot of contributions coming from many teams. So if you see that there is some service where tens of teams are contributing on a frequent basis, then definitely this is the hotspot that needs to be investigated. Maybe it's time to split it. Maybe we just want to analyze and understand the reasons why so many different teams need to be writing code there, because we understand that it's actually slowing everyone down. Other benefit from just like having this visual representation of what's happening in your code base with the precision of one service is because also the owning team will be probably more disciplined and more informed about how things are going. And like often, if you go to that dashboard that we have and you start clicking on some teams and their services, you can spot those places where something has changed. For example, some microservice grew to 35,000 lines of code, and then pretty much like in 2 months dropped to 30. So most likely, like these are the cases where someone decides that some of the code base needs to be moved out. So usually, I think without this visibility, there will be less initiative to look after your code base with such view. And obviously, when things are being released out to production, they need to go through the pull request stage. So each pull request also has its own lead time, because you might speed everything up before the pull request, but then if your pull request will be slow, then your overall lead time will be still slow. So we started also looking into how much time from submitting a pull request to merging a pull request like is usually taking on the average per service. Then the learnings that I remember really well, which again, everything is like quite intuitive here. For example, pull requests with more lines of code are proven to be slower, because it takes also more time to review them, because they are probably more complex. So this was like a really good indication to us and to tech leads to promote this idea of instead of like huge pull requests that you spend a lot of time on, start working in smaller batches and smaller pull requests because they are simply faster. And if you multiply the compound impact on the overall speed of delivery of the whole company, will become faster as well. And then as you pass from this pull request cycle, you get into releasing. So again, here it was just pleasure and excitement to discover how often we are actually releasing. And so yeah, today we are already like at several thousand times per month, which for me gives a lot of confidence, because I think it means that we have grown quite big, but we didn't lose the speed, which is a really good thing, because it means that we are still a startup or scale up and not a corporate slow organization. And I hope that more companies will find them in this fast-paced world of development. One other thing which changes as you move to hundreds of people is also the type of teams that you have in the company. And usually when some startup or product team starts, then they have a lot of vertical teams. Usually those vertical teams own some specific domains or features or maybe regions, or they can be also just like logically split into different verticals like finance, treasury, and so on. But at some point, it becomes like financially viable to actually segregate some of common functions into horizontal teams which serve every other team in the company. And usually the first thing that like is kind of split off into this like very like clearly horizontal team that serves every other team in the company is let's call it IT and infrastructure. So the guys that deal with cloud environment and data centers and overall like infrastructure of deployment. But at some point, as you progress further, because like this is quite boring example, it's very standard. But at some point, some new horizontal types of teams start to emerge. For example, machine learning platform, or real-time data platform, or DB engineering. And here is each team in Wise has its own mission statement. So they write down why they exist in the company and what's their purpose. So this is an example from a real-time data team. So they say that we enable Wise to process data in real time in a scalable, reliable, secure, cost-effective, easy, and convenient way. We build a self-service platform anticipating the needs of product teams. And the kind of key aspect here is this self-service platform. So they are like an internal software as a service company who has all other teams as their customers. And for example, real-time data processing and data streaming and aggregation, this is actually a really deep domain. So it would be, a waste of people and a waste of resource to have that knowledge in every single product team or like every single vertical team that needs it. It's much better to just collect these people and kind of enable them to create powerful interfaces that will empower all vertical teams to apply this complicated technology without needing to have very deep knowledge in that technology. Or one of my favorite examples is our machine learning platform. So they've been like building this self-service tooling for teams, and these days more and more teams, like whatever domain they work in, are they customer-facing teams or like internal teams, everyone is starting to find reasons why to apply machine learning workflows and models for the business logic that they build. And so they have this mission that it should be possible to deploy a machine learning workflow in just one day to production, to real customers, without any prior machine learning knowledge. So as a goal, it sounds really good. I haven't seen it being implemented in a day, but one of my teams started the machine learning workflow for some like fraud prevention reasons in just a week. So that was the moment where I saw that, okay, our machine learning platform team has built good enough tooling and all the guidance and libraries and guides that actually enable this. And in that team, no one was having any machine learning experience prior to that, which I think is like really powerful, because you can get straight to the point, straight to applying this technology for the needs of the customers, for like improvement of the product, without needing to like really dig into that and adopt it in your own team. And maybe last thing that I wanted to finish my talk was about the talent. So I joined the company 7.5 years ago, so I'm 31 years old today, which means that I have spent 24% of my life in this one company. And the one like thing that I saw is that as we were growing, we started attracting quite a different talent, because also the kind of engineering challenges were changing. Maybe the company also had a better known name in some specific regions. But you know, what excites me about like getting to that stage is that at some point you see that you are starting to attract really a lot of talent from those like major, really well known and respected companies like Facebook, eBay, Google, Amazon, Apple, so you name it. So like one thing here at that stage is also that you start to be surrounded by people that bring in similar experience, or actually experience from much larger teams, which actually work according to same principles of lean startup and OKR and the very data-driven models. So like, yeah, usually when I speak kind of with people about what has changed in the past 8 years, then kind of talent and the type of people that you are surrounded with is always one of the things that I'm pointing out. So I hope that more companies in Baltic states will become unicorns. Last year I also invested in my first Latvian company myself. It was Prettify. So I really hope that Baltics will become the Silicon Valley of Europe, and let's do it. And for some reason we have 3 or 4 technical blogs which are all over the internet. The one that I'm writing to is medium.com/transferengineering. This is our old name, but if you liked some aspects of it, or you would like to learn more about the philosophy of product engineering that we promote, then please go there and read more from me and from our other engineers. Please shoot.
Question: how many test engineers, automation testing engineers?
As much as I know, 0. So
who is writing all the test cases? Is it developers themselves?
yes. Is it bad or good?
I wonder how you do it. How do you manage to ensure that all your product teams know what they have to test?
So I think that the simplicity comes from like everyone owning like relatively small part of this like overall pie. So like if you only need to deal with 6 microservices, then the area where you actually like need to touch code on a day-to-day basis is kind of relatively small.
Yeah, it's clear, but how do you make sure that changing this microservice won't break something on the other side of your system?
Okay, I can tell like some more things which will be relevant. It might not answer it directly, but like in addition to like having build time tests, we also have system-wide tests, which like are also like running all the time. Plus, we also have production tests, which are robots which are mimicking the behavior of customers. So, for example, like if you release something and in your own service all your tests passed, great. But then you still break something in production, then you know. I don't know like how frequently they run, but like many times every hour, main flows of all of our features are actually tested by robots. So even like with small delay, but like you will still get alert about it that something is broken.
These robots? Is it some product teams who are responsible for these robots?
So everyone can contribute there, but also we have this concept of key flows, because like there are so many flows that you can cover. So on a low level you cover everything. Then you have some system-wide tests which test basically like contracts and operations between multiple services, and then you have those production tests which are mimicking the behavior of the customer in real production. But of course, as you move like higher to this pyramid from like low-level unit tests all the way to the production tests, then of course at some point you start to prioritize and you cover only the most critical flows. And in every product you always have like the main flows and then like sub flows which are less critical and have less customer impact if they break. But so far so good. Of course it does require quite a lot of discipline when it comes to code test coverage and the automation. But since it was there from day one, I think people are onboarded in some specific way. We explain to them that this is like your role because you own this service and it's in your interests, and like you also need to own the quality of the service. So I think it depends on like how you define the culture. For us, it has worked.
Thank you.
A question about kind of working in that scale, kind of how the teams kind of agree on the way how they communicate, and that they are kind of backbone of the whole service, and that they agree that they communicate in this way, or that's team to team kind of decision how they're gonna kind of communicate with each other.
Do you mean like inside of teams or on a cross?
Between the teams.
Between teams on a cross-team level.
Yeah.
Good question. I don't know which angle you are coming to that, but I think that even if teams work in an autonomous manner and they are like quite autonomous from each other and independent, like you still have common kind of CTO and like you still have kind of technical leads on a team, squad, and tribe level. So like we have this model, this naming, and I guess like these people also like need to kind of make sure that we also create some sort of common culture when it comes to like how do we work, how do we do those things. But I haven't like noticed like very much extra effort that goes into cross-team. It just seems to be working out relatively smoothly. But as I was also like showing here, we have been looking into reasons why people even like need to work on a cross-team level, and one of the optimization to increase the speed was being like always critical. Do we actually need to work on a cross-team level here, or can more of that be done like locally inside of those teams, so that this development doesn't go to cross-team scale? Of course, like you cannot like fully achieve no cross-team work, but it has been like interesting to observe that definitely any cross-team collaboration is slowing us down, and if you can spot anything where it can be eliminated, it will speed you up. But then of course there are like cases where we create we call it guilds. So for example, like there is some common domain or like common project which we know that will require contributions from multiple teams. Then we form them into a guild, which is like people that represent different teams that will need to be involved, and they are like ambassadors. So they have their own maybe like temporary stand-ups and meetings where they discuss this particular goal. Then they go and talk with their teams, or they are the sole contributors representing those different domains, which will be required to implement some cross-team project.
So it sounds like Spotify model, right?
Very likely. So there is one Spotify book that I really want to read. Thanks for reminding me. But in general, I think that yeah, if we kind of take a look at majority of successful startups which have been like growing and becoming like industry leaders in some industries, then you will find a lot of common patterns how they operate. And And from those like 2 books, like Lean Startup and Measure What Matters, you will also like find that most of them are actually originating from the concepts that originate from there. Or for example, like they move to Google, then with Google employees they move to some other company, then they are changed a little bit there, so they just like keep evolving. But yeah, I guess a lot of roots go to 80s and 70s in Silicon Valley, and that's how it has been just evolving.
Do you have any performance measurements that backfired on you, that you said like, no, we're not going to do this anymore, like with negative impact?
Well, can you specify the question?
Like for instance, we were gonna look at how many messages teams send across to each other, or how many calls do they have, and then just people start, oh, it has some bad impact. People start calling each other too much, maybe, or something like this.
Okay, I can bring one personal example. I think personal examples work the best. One bit that I didn't cover about PRs was the number of comments in pull requests. And that was interesting because I just like discovered that one of my teams has pull requests which almost like never have any comments. That was like sort of suspicious, because like do they even like review those things? And then I had another team which had a lot of comments like all the time, and then you can see that okay, the team that has a lot of comments, their pull request life cycle is also longer, so it means that this team is slower. And then the next like logical thing is, okay, let's take a look at the rollback stats. Maybe the team that is having like doing those like shitty and no comments pull requests, maybe they have some problems with the quality because they are sloppy with pull requests. But it turned out that there was no performance difference, which means that for some reason one of the teams is talking a lot of talks in the pull request phase, and also delivering things in a more slower fashion. So the learning there was actually that the team was not doing good enough prep work before pull requests, which means that there were a lot of disputes in the team, clashes of opinions, no, do it a different way, which means that before starting to write the code, this team usually didn't have consensus about how something needs to be built. So that's just like one of those examples where it was possible to just like merely looking at the data, looking at some other data, and putting together the picture, which of the teams with different data has a problem, and then like being able to then just go one by one into those pull requests and see what's happening there, and concluding that, hey guys, it looks like maybe something needs to change when you scope the development. So maybe like, can you try to be on the same page before you start developing, because like really you are losing time by arguing in pull requests. We need you to be on the same page and just deliver it without friction.
Do you have a question? No? You are raising hand.
Yeah, I have a question. So you talk about growing from 50 to 500 people. And so once you're hiring people, do you prefer to create new teams from new people, or you prefer to grow existing teams and then split them up?
Excellent question. So I really prefer existing people creating new teams, and also whenever possible not to rush with creating new teams, but more like for example, we want to launch some like new feature which is remotely connected to one of teams. So it's always like best not to just create a new team and tell them that, hey, figure it out and start building it from scratch. But I prefer letting this team like know that yes, I'm not against like you building that. Create it as a, like for example, side project that you can like dedicate some time, build the proof of concept, the MVP, so that we go really implement something that like we can see. And then yeah, we prefer splitting the teams from existing ones, and very often that's actually happening in a natural way, because teams themselves come up with new things that they want to create. They communicate it in their like quarterly plans. Then we tell them that okay, prove the concept, prove that it will work. So it becomes like a new project in their team, and eventually, often people who are working on that in that team create another team, and in the meanwhile we deal with hiring additional people to the initial team, so that you don't get into a situation that you split the team and now you have two understaffed teams. And also another aspect here is if you split the team, then people that were used to split this team, they take this culture and kind of habits to this team. So the team automatically inherits certain like ways of working from some existing team that functions well, which increases the probability that this new created team will be operating in a similar fashion and will be good too. And also, of course, it equalizes the consistency of how teams operate in the company over long run. Because if every time when you create a team you will be getting completely new people, then you will have very inconsistent situation in the company and teams working in a very different way.
Erik, I see that there are more questions. I'm just, what time do you want to leave?
So my check-in